right, welcome in, Herle Burly-ites. Pull up a chair and turn up your computer volume, or maybe it's better to put your AirPods in to protect the family from the profanity, and so you don't have to cop to the fact you actually listen to a show like ours. It's time for another two-part pod on the Herle Burly. Part one, I'm absolutely chuffed to welcome Jagmeet Singh to the pod. You all know that Mr. Singh is the leader of the New Democratic Party, but do you really know Mr. Singh? Well, we're going to dive into his personal story and path to leadership, and then we're going to spend some time discussing where the NDP are right now and his plans moving forward. Part two of the pod is Jenni, Byrne, Scott, Reid, and me, three cranks taking turns at being fractious and having a few laughs, better known as the political panel. Plenty to whinge about this week. We'll talk about what's going on in the Newfoundland Election, and we'll chat about Nova Scotia's change in premier. On the heels of my tweet last weekend and what might be the worst set of polling data I've ever seen for the Conservatives, Erin O'Toole has a new ad out reintroducing himself to Canadians. We'll chat about O'Toole and the Conservatives, and I'll ask the panel one of the questions that I put to Mr. Singh. The interesting thing is we recorded the panel prior to my interview with the leader, so we'll see how the answers match up. Plus, there's our Hey Yous this week. Stick around for that. Jagmeet Singh, I want to welcome you to the Herle Burly. What a thrill it is to have you here. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you, David. I really appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Great. So how are you? Everybody likes to whinge these days. What's the worst part of the pandemic for you?
The worst part of the pandemic is probably I'm worried about people a lot. And so I think a lot about the impact it's had on folks and how we can help them. So I carry some of that weight. On a personal note, though, I feel a little guilty to admit that I've been doing really well. I have one of those folks that has been flourishing in the pandemic. As much as I love people and I love connecting with people, I have been able to adjust to the Zoom life and working from home. So I've been okay. I cook a lot, so I get to cook more when I work from home and spend time with my partner. So I've been okay on a personal note.
But you seem super extroverted. Are you not, or have you not been missing people?
I love people. I love people. I love connecting with people. But I also did a lot of meditation growing up and went through a lot of struggles as a kid. So I learned how to spend time with myself. So I am comfortable in both settings, but I definitely am an extrovert if I had a choice.
Why jiu-jitsu? Of all of the activities and of all of the martial arts, why jiu-jitsu?
You know what? I really fell in love with it. I started off my martial arts career in Taekwondo, and then I did wrestling, and wrestling really came to me. I didn't have a lot of training in grappling. I trained in striking, and my friends and I would box sometimes. I ended up taking up boxing as well and kickboxing, and I enjoy all forms of martial arts. But something about jiu-jitsu and wrestling, the grappling, was really interesting to me. It really felt like human chess. There is a lot of strategy. You can train really intensely and you get bumps and bruises, but not really get injured. And boxing, while I love it, and kickboxing, while I love it, if you ever train, you get pretty beat up after a good sparring session. So that also maybe is a bit of it. But yeah, there's something I just really enjoy. There's something very primal about grappling, and it's something that I've really enjoyed. I kind of grew up as a fighter, and there's a bit of me that's that fighting spirit, why I fight for people as well, why I fought in the courtroom, and why now as leader I'm fighting for a brighter future.
Kung Fu was very big when I was a kid. I don't know if people still do Kung Fu.
Yeah, I know. You know what I was thinking about it?
According to the song, everybody was Kung Fu fighting.
Everyone was Kung Fu fighting, and that's a good song. You know what? Another reason why jiu-jitsu, if I could say, I should have thought of this story. There was, folks probably know about UFC. It's pretty popular. UFC started, it's got a number beside each, UFC 256, UFC has a number. There was UFC 1 many, many years ago. And UFC 1, the tournament was won by a somewhat lean-looking, not particularly muscular or big guy that beat everybody, larger people, muscular people, and he beat them using jiu-jitsu. And that's when I was first really impressed by this martial art that worked in a real-life tournament. And he was able to beat people much larger. And there's something really powerful about jiu-jitsu in that you can use your opponent's force against them. If you're really well trained, a smaller, weaker person can beat someone bigger and stronger. That to me is really cool too about it.
Well, you're the first national leader of a political party that I've ever met who I'm pretty sure could kick my ass.
Well, I mean, I've been training my whole life, and that's something I'm good at for sure.
Now you're
I wouldn't though. I'd rather just give you a hug or chat with you,
Sure, but you could. It's important. You're standing.
I am.
I learned this in the pre-interview here. You are standing through this interview, not sitting like me. You do not need artificial things to support your body weight. You can stand on your own legs. You told me you stand through most meetings.
Yeah, I like to stand as much as I can. It's important for me. I believe it's good for health. And I also find when I'm standing, I'm more engaged and it keeps me focused. So I enjoy it. I think it's good for you. And I think there's a lot of studies out there that the less we sit on chairs or couches, the better for us. So I try to take that to heart.
I try to forget about it. But anyway, so let's get into it. When did you get attracted to politics and why?
So I was an activist before I became a politician. So I always believed that politics is important, but I had this belief that we had to force or push leaders to do what was right. So I was very, very much a believer that governance is important, that we need to make good decisions, but the people making those decisions wouldn't make them the right way unless they were forced. And that's why protests and demonstrations were very vital. So I was really helpful, or I worked a lot with groups that were fighting poverty or supporting people that were marginalized. And as a defense lawyer, I represented lots of folks that were struggling financially. And so that was very much important to me. The shift when I went to politics itself was difficult because as an activist, I didn't really believe it was the place for me. I didn't think I would fit in. It didn't feel like a natural place to go. But I got to give a lot of credit to my brother, Grattan Singh, and a good friend, Jagmeet Singh, who really kind of convinced me that this would be the right thing to do. So it took a lot of persuasion, and then I went towards it. But I would say the reason came down to, as a lawyer, I was helping one person at a time, and then I was spending some time helping people out in community work. So one person at a time versus helping a whole community, a whole province, a whole country, that was appealing. And then something that my mom always taught me, my brother reminded me that we had gone through ups and downs as a family, and that surviving wasn't good enough, that to thrive was our goal, and thriving always meant to give back to people around you. So that kind of sealed the deal for me. That and my brother's guilt tripping, I ended up getting into politics.
Excellent. And you enter politics and you run against an incumbent who is running for the party that is going to get reelected as the government, albeit with a reduced caucus, but they're going to get reelected as the government. And you trounce that incumbent. Like you just came in and you beat him by several thousand votes, right? Who were you in the community at that time?
Well, I have to give a lot of credit to a really unorthodox approach. I was a young lawyer, community organizer, and really involved in young people. We had a number of groups that were providing leadership, mentoring. I was doing Know Your Rights seminars to young people. And we had this amazing team of young people that got involved in the campaign, really believed in our vision of trying to make young people's voice matter, but fighting for the community in a way that really lifted up people and wasn't kind of the status quo. So really what was unorthodox and what really stood out and kind of gave us that momentum was the fact that we had high school kids that couldn't even vote, university students. I was 32 when I first ran, or when I first won, and I was by far the oldest person in my campaign office. My campaign manager, my team, everyone was younger. So it was a lot of young people that made that historic victory possible.
Well, that's pretty impressive. So you were practicing law in Brampton?
Yeah, I was in the GTA, I say, because I started off working at a firm that was downtown. And so I had clients in Toronto and in the greater Toronto area, and absolutely in Brampton, Mississauga.
Okay, because I'm just wondering how you got involved in the NDP. You are a politically ambitious brown person from Peel. How did the Liberal Party miss out on you?
Well,
How did the Liberal Party not wrap you up early?
I was, like I said, I was very cynical about politics, and I was cynical about politicians. And the party that had been in power for a long time, that hadn't done the things that people needed, wouldn't appeal to me because of that activist cynicism. I just didn't see them doing the things that people needed. And it was Jack Layton, actually, a part of the convincing. When my brother and my friend convinced me, they pointed at Jack Layton. When I kept saying, I don't know if I could trust, being a politician or political life, I just had that cynicism. And they pointed, well, what about Jack? You like him, right? He's someone who stood up for things that matter to you. And he's someone that has shown that you could be a credible, reliable, trustworthy leader. And I said, you know what? I do like Jack. So that was probably my earliest specific example of a politician I liked. And I had always leaned towards the NDP when I voted before, though I hadn't any direct connection. And most of my family, I would say, were certainly liberal leaning. But I didn't have a direct kind of mentor or someone in the party that kind of convinced me. It was really seeing the things that the NDP was doing, and then Jack Layton specifically, that inspired me.
Okay. Did you think when you joined the NDP that you were seeking political power, or were you wanting to be influential, if you see the difference? Did you see the NDP as a vehicle to power?
That's a really good question, and that goes back to your last question about the Liberals. I didn't do this because it was easy. I didn't think about politics as an easy path. If I did want an easy path, I would have absolutely become a Liberal, because that is the easier path, easier to get elected. People know the brand, and it's an easier path to power. For me, I wanted to make a difference. That was really, and I wanted to make it about fighting for things that matter to people in a way that was fierce and focused on people, and not like unapologetic about wanting things to be better, making sure the wealthy pay their fair share, making sure we increase our public services. And it was a lot of it born out of the injustice. I look at Brampton and see that people were being taken for granted. And there had been the status quo parties had been in power for a long time, and there weren't the services, they weren't the supports. When I was MPP, there was no community center for much of my mandate in the entire portion. One large portion of the riding I represented didn't have a single community center that kids could go to. And so they had been represented by Liberal after Liberal, but they hadn't gotten basic investments in their community. So I didn't do it for an ambitious path to power. I did it to make a difference. And I hope that being in a position of power will help us make a difference. But it wasn't the other way around, pursuit of power and then do something with it. It was the pursuit of making a difference. And then I realized more and more we need to be in a position to make that difference.
Right. I want to ask you about what surely is one of the great moments of your life, which is winning the leadership of the NDP, a major national party. How did it feel to accomplish that?
It was a really special. Sorry. I kind of cut you off there.
No, I'm done. Yeah. No.
Yeah, it was a very, very special moment. Everything about the journey was special. The moment before, it was just this incredible journey. And I remember so many different special moments throughout. I remember going to different parts of Canada and kids coming up to me from all sorts of backgrounds saying, like, you being the leader of this party would make me feel like I belong. And I just feeling like how much that meant to me. I remember being at two different events from two different ethnic communities, and both of those events being approached by young people on the lead up to this leadership race, who said they followed me on social media and they were so excited because if I could become the leader of a national party, they felt like they could do anything in their life, like that feeling. And so when it happened, the moment it happened, I thought about all the people that believed in this, all the people that had worked so hard. And I thought about those kids that I'd spoken to that saw themselves reflected in me. And it was just an incredible moment.
Yeah, I got to know a person named Michael Hay.
Oh, wow.
Through the CBC, some work we did together during the election campaign. And A, she was wonderful. But second of all, I could tell by talking to her that your campaign had been just a marvelously inspirational, aspirational thing for her. And so I've felt it must have been something special.
Yeah, it was like a labor of love for everyone involved. And Michael Hay was my campaign manager for the leadership run. Beautiful human being, and recently a new mom. So congratulations to her. But
really, I didn't know that. Congratulations, Michael.
Yeah, really great. Her and her partner. So like it was the people poured their hearts into this. It wasn't like we had people that came in 9 to 5. This is people that looked at it as a labor of love. There was this movement of people joining up, people signing up to become members. There was this really powerful feeling that is indescribable, but was so special to be a part of. And really, it wasn't about me as an individual. It was kind of the idea of what it stood for and how everyone bought into this powerful moment of young people organizing again, of people that are often excluded from the conversations when it comes to who do you think of as a person that could lead a country. And so it represented a lot of things to a lot of people. And that was just a beautiful thing to be a part of.
I have a question to ask you that I'm really curious about. So I feel I need to ask it, but it scares me. Can I ask you a question that scares me?
Sure.
Okay. You're a person, and I say this without any ulterior motive. You're a person that pays a lot of attention to image. You're impeccably well dressed. You're one of the most stylish people in the world. You're in glamour magazines. You have made a conscious decision to attempt to become the Prime Minister without compromising on your appearance. Did you ever consider cutting your hair and trimming your beard to fit a more conventional and comfortable image? Or what would be involved with that personally for you if you were to do something like that?
I appreciate the question because it actually has come up. And I remember an interesting story, when I first was making the decision to get into politics, some of my early supporters and friends said, we should go and get some advice. So they took me to go speak with someone who was well-established, a South Asian gentleman that was well-established in politics, and to ask him for some advice. And he told me a couple of things. He said, first off, you got to change your name. Using Jagmeet, it's hard to pronounce. You should shorten it to Jag, and you should pronounce it Jag. Don't pronounce it Jagmeet, which is the proper way to pronounce it. He's like, yeah, I know that's the proper way, but Jag is easier to say. You should do that. And then I dropped my last name and use Singh. And he said, no, but people know you by your last name. You're a lawyer. You're well known by it. You should keep your last name. And I said, well, I like the idea that Singh signifies that spiritual belief in the Sikh tradition, that we are all equal, that we're all one, that no one is higher or lower. And your last name signifies your caste or your status in society. And really the Sikh tradition was to not use your last name. You know where you're from, so you could ensure that you know who your family is and who's not your family, just for life purposes, but not to use that as a title. So he said, no, I don't think that's a good idea. Then he told me, he's like, your beard is open. You should tie it up or trim it. And your turban is this circular shape. It's not as conventional. You should change it to the more conventional shape. So kind of gave me all this advice. And I said, well, I don't really want to change the way I look to get elected. Like, I think that I have some great ideas and I think I stand for important things. And I want people to see me as someone who is a person of conviction, and that I back up my word and I'll do what I say. And I think that's more important than the way I look. And I'm proud of the way I look. And I think it's important. And what was remarkable is I ended up keeping the way I look out, obviously. But what was remarkable was we did some recent kind of feedback from folks and asking people their perceptions. And one of the things, I always want to take something that's considered a disadvantage and turn it into an advantage. Like, I always thought of that. And so I remember when I was stared at walking through the hallways of courtrooms, as I was the only young guy with a beard and a turban trying to earn a living as a lawyer and make a name for myself as a lawyer, people would stare at me. And I always thought, let me give them something to stare at. They're already looking at me. So I'd dress extra sharp and I would over prepare for the simplest arguments, and people would kind of notice me because they were already staring. And so similarly, I thought, I'm going to stick to who I am. And we found out that one of the things people think about me, they think that I'm very authentic and very real. And part of it is because I didn't compromise on the way I look. So maybe it's a part of something that would have been seen as a disadvantage, but now is seen as a part of why people trust me. They think that I'm not someone that compromises on something that would have been so easy to do. It would have been much easier to compromise the way I looked. But for me, it wouldn't be true to who I am. And if I'm not true to who I am, how could I be true to the people I want to represent?
Well, I don't know. When Preston Manning got rid of his glasses and put on contacts, it made all the difference for him.
Well, I mean, if it was a question about contacts and glasses, I think that's less about my identity. But I was bullied as a kid, for the way I looked, and I said, no, I'm not going to change it. I was made fun of. I had to get into physical fights because of the way I looked. There was a time when, after 9/11, anyone that wore a turban was considered a terrorist, so people would yell that at me, and I never hesitated. I always believed in what this stands for, because what it stands for is a lot of my core beliefs. Like the Sikh tradition is founded in this idea that we're all one. So not just that we're equal, we're literally one. So if I see you struggling and hurting, I should feel like I'm hurting. And if I see people struggling in poverty, it's not that that person is a fellow human being. It's literally, that's me. I could have been that person hurting and struggling with poverty. So my sense of morality comes from this deep belief that we are so interconnected that if people around us are hurting, we're hurting. But if we help people around us, we all rise. And those are beliefs that are tied into the way I look. And so I couldn't compromise the way I look, because I don't compromise on this idea that we're connected.
Interesting. Thank you. Appreciate the answer very much.
Of course.
Okay. You, like Trudeau, you took over a party that had been rocked to its foundations in the previous election campaign. And the 2015 election campaign is likely, in historical terms, to be a very important one for the New Democratic Party. And in order to move forward from something like that, you sort of have to take stock of where you were. The Trudeau people came up with a theory about what had taken the Liberal Party to its point. What is your assessment about what went wrong for the NDP in 2015?
It's a subject of a lot of debate and discussion, because you always want to improve on things that happened. I think what was missing at the end of the day was that connection to people and connecting to people on things that matter. So people care about healthcare. People care about taking care of each other, and people trust New Democrats on these things. And I feel like there wasn't that feeling of, these are folks that are in it for me, that are going to fight for me. Like that feeling has to always be there. And you could write the policies on paper that say, hey, we're going to do this. But if the connection isn't there with people, if that connection doesn't speak to the hearts of people that, hey, we are actually here to make your life better, and here are the ways we're going to do it. And when the focus is on, here are the ways we're going to do it, without the emotional connection to people, you see a disconnect. And I think that's what happened, that there was there's much more specific strategic things that we can come up with, but if a broad kind of stroke, what was missing was that ability to connect directly to the people that we wanted to connect to, and I think that was missing. Coming off of someone like Jack Layton, who had emphasized that tremendously and had it was all connect, with just really felt what people are going through, reflected what they were going through, and then in a convincing way said, I'm going to work to make that better. That, I think, we were less focused on that human emotion. And I think that might have been one of the broad reasons.
That makes a lot of sense. And it was also both directly and diplomatically stated. In my 58 years on the planet, I've gone from vinyl records to CDs, I skipped cassettes, to music streaming, and now back to vinyl. But internet technology is not something you go back to older versions of. Once you get a taste of something objectively better, nothing else measures up. Which brings us to 5G, my friends. Let's see, how do I analogize this? Your current expectations of bandwidth are like a reliable and roomy sedan. But 5G turns them into a turbocharged stretch limo, complete with disco lights, hot tub, and a minibar. It's designed to connect virtually everyone and everything with mind-blowing speed, reliability, and near-endless data capacity. Our presenting sponsor, TELUS, launched their 5G network in 2020, and it's now live in more than 76 communities across Canada. TELUS 5G will offer so much more technological capability and opportunity for Canadians. On top of that, according to a report commissioned by the Canadian Wireless Telecommunications Association, the continued expansion of 5G would result in 150,000 short-term and 250,000 permanent jobs in Canada between 2020 and 2026. There'd be a $40 billion uplift to Canada's GDP by 2026, and rural, remote, and Indigenous connectivity would explode because 5G costs up to 40% less than laying fiber over vast stretches of land and craggy, rough terrain. TELUS is already ranked as the fastest network in Canada by OpenSignal, but they're committed to getting faster, better, and to working in partnership with governments to get 5G spectrum released quickly and efficiently and deployed to customers just as quickly, so that all Canadians can digitally access even greater opportunity through a world-class network. Go to connectingcanadaforgood.ca to learn more. So let's look forward. Trudeau appears by the current polls to be headed to re-election. Why is that the wrong result? What is the core reason why the Trudeau government should be defeated?
I think the core reason comes down to kind of what I just said earlier a bit. What people are kind of wondering, what's in it for me? What is, if I'm going to vote, how's this going to help my life or my family's life out? And I put it to people that who has shown again and again that they are going to be on your side, in your corner, fighting for you. I would say it's been us, New Democrats. Like, we look at all the major things that have happened. The wage subsidy was introduced at 10%. That was the Liberal government's decision to introduce it at 10%. We fought and we pushed. We cited country after country that has done at least 75%, and we pushed and fought and made it 75%. The wage subsidy is just one example. We also saw CERB introduced at $1,000. That was the way it was introduced. And having gone through moments in my life where we didn't have enough money to put food on the table, knowing what it's like to not know if you can earn enough, not just for yourself, but to support. I was living with my kid brother when I was in university. I was supporting him. I was the sole provider of income. And if I wasn't going to eat, I could maybe get around that. But the thought of my kid brother not eating, I just couldn't imagine that. So things are desperate sometimes. And I don't think Justin Trudeau got that. And so when I came and said, we've got to get it to $2,000, we have to double this. That was something we fought for and we achieved. We doubled the amount that nearly 8 million Canadians got. They got $1,000 more a month because we were there. And then paid sick leave, not on the agenda. No one was bringing it forward. We brought it forward, introduced it, made it happen. And now all the experts are saying paid sick leave is probably the single most important tool to stop the spread of infection in workplaces, which is one of the highest cases or highest likelihood of transmission is going to be in workplaces. So we did that. And then when we think about who's going to pay for this, we've said we're the only ones that say that New Democrats are the only ones that say that it should be the wealthiest that pay their fair share. The web giants that pay virtually no tax in Canada should be taxed. That companies should not be able to use offshore tax havens. There should be a tax on those who've got fortunes of over 20 million. There should be the pandemic profiteering tax. And we put that forward and every party in Parliament voted against it. Liberals, Bloc, Conservatives all voted against this, despite the fact this is wildly popular. Everyone agrees the wealthiest should pay their fair share. So when it comes down to it, I would say the reason why this government shouldn't continue is when push comes to shove, they've shown that they've defended the pharmaceutical industry a number of times instead of going after them, whether it's on making medication more affordable, whether it's negotiating so we had local production. They've kind of chosen pharmaceuticals over people. When it comes to the wealthiest, we said, let's tax them directly, the wealthiest. They said no and protected their interest. So I think we've shown that we are the ones that are focused on really putting people first in a concrete way and making the response to this pandemic more compassionate and making the response to the recovery more compassionate. I think people can trust us.
Thank you. Just as a side detour, the kind of influence you've had with the government, is that all through public advocacy, or do you have regular back channel conversations with senior members of the government? Like, are you sort of in a partner? I don't mean I don't mean in a negative way, but I mean, do they treat you like a partner? Are there serious discussions that go on about how big the CERB should be or the wage subsidy or these other issues? Or are you just yelling through a megaphone at them?
Both. We've had public advocacy. We've pushed for things publicly, and then we've had conversations. There was a point where we were having conversations on an almost bi-weekly basis with either me directly with the Prime Minister, our House leaders were in constant communication. Because we're in a minority government, they needed votes to get things passed from at least one party. And often, I mean, it's not hard to imagine, but when it came to our positions, when we wanted to double CERB, we were the only ones fighting for that. Conservatives weren't talking about doing that. They were reluctant to even admit that CERB wasn't useful. So many of these things and then in terms of who was willing to work with the government to do things like to move to a modified session where we had the virtual session. Conservatives were opposed to it. Bloc didn't really have a position. They weren't really coming forward. And so we said, we'll agree to that, but if you give us paid sick leave. So we had both conversations going on between our teams, our House leaders and our critics, and also direct conversation between me and the Prime Minister. Our Chief of Staffs were also in communication. But it was mostly, it was not a partnership. It wasn't like, hey, we have an idea, what's your thought? It was, we need your help to pass something. We said, well, no, unless you do this, we're not going to support you. And that's how we fought and won things. So we fought for them tooth and nail often. They were not accepted for weeks and weeks. And we kept on fighting with tenacious resolve. And then we were able to then get the victory for people.
Now, these are not the Liberals of 1995. This is a fairly left-leaning version of the Liberal Party. There must be something about the government you like. What do you like about the government?
Well, I think something it's good to say about Canadians in general, like all political parties, that kind of makes us unique is that we are accepting of the science. Even your most, even conservative leaders, maybe with some exception, not the most conservative, maybe not, but most conservative leaders, accept that there is public expert evidence that we have to follow when it comes to certain protocols. So I think that's something encouraging. This Prime Minister particularly has been respectful of course, scientists and of the evidence. And in this pandemic, that's been vital. And I think that's something we can be proud of as Canadians, that by and large, we've got some exceptions. Maybe Jason Kenney in Alberta has been horrible and not following evidence. But by and large, people accept some of the things that in the States wouldn't be taken for granted. Like in the States, you would have people just rejecting basic evidence. So I think that's something that's encouraging, that you can work with someone that at least accepts some of the facts that we all make our decisions based on.
Thin gruel, Jagmeet. That was thin gruel you gave me on something good about Trudeau.
We've been able to work together.
Okay. I'm going to put to you a question that I submit to you is a problem for the NDP because I am asking you this question genuinely and don't know the answer.
Okay.
You're operating in crowded space. The Green Party exists. It elects a few more people every electoral cycle. The new leader appears to me to have some game. You're dealing with a version of the Liberal Party that is more left-wing than the Liberal Party has historically been. So you're in some crowded space. What is the reason for a person to choose the NDP? What is, in old marketing lingo, what is the NDP's unique selling proposition?
A lot of things. Specifically, we can start with who pays for this pandemic, who pays the cost of the recovery. We have put it very clearly that we believe, what many Canadians believe, it should be on the wealthiest, those who have the means to. Tommy Douglas was often quoted saying, who pays for it? Well, those who can afford to. And we're the only ones that have put that forward. We, like I mentioned, we put this idea of taxing the wealthiest directly, wealth tax, pandemic profiteering tax, closing loopholes, direct ways to tax the wealthiest. And the Liberals voted no, Conservatives, Bloc, everyone voted no. We were the only ones in that position to say the wealthy should pay their fair share. On long-term care, one of the biggest and worst impacts of this pandemic has been that it has been borne by the lives of seniors in long-term care. And all the experts say conclusively that for-profit care is one of the major causes. It is the worst conditions, worst rates of infections, and most deaths have happened in for-profit. We are the only ones saying we need to get rid of profit out of all of our healthcare system, but specifically long-term care. The issue that has been the worst in terms of the impact of COVID-19, we're the only ones that are following what all the experts agree. We've got to get rid of profit in long-term care. And we're proudly and boldly saying that. And we've got a plan to achieve that, starting with Rivera, which is completely owned by a federal agency. And then when it comes to what people need in a pandemic, they need healthcare. We're the party of healthcare. We founded the principle of universal healthcare in Saskatchewan with Tommy Douglas, fought to bring that across Canada. And now we're saying our healthcare system has to respond to the needs of people in a pandemic. And that means no one in our country should worry about the cost of medication. No one should have to worry about the cost of fixing their teeth. We're the only party clearly and boldly stating we want universal public healthcare that includes universal, publicly delivered pharmacare as well as dental care. That's a space that we occupy with the credibility because we fought for this for a long time. We believe in it. And so when it comes down to it, if people want someone that's going to be on their side to fight for the things that matter in a pandemic and coming out of a pandemic, each of the things that matter most, we have a plan and a vision and a commitment that is the most credible to deliver on those things.
Okay, cool. I want to just take a side diversion because you have been laying out a lot of policy recently. And in preparing for this interview, I went through your Twitter feed for weeks, for the last number of weeks, and it's policy, 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 policy. And I Googled you. And I had to get through pages and pages and pages of Google search findings before I found any policy at all. What I saw was coverage of conspiracy theories from India. I saw coverage of Proud Boys. I saw coverage of you getting kicked out of the House of Commons for calling somebody a racist. Why do you think there's such a mismatch between what the media cover about you and what you're actually talking about?
I was not prepared for that question. It's a good question. I don't know how the media works in the way they tell their stories. I wish that the story was told that in this pandemic, Canadians, millions of Canadians are better off because we were able to fight to double their CERB and we were able to get students help that didn't have help. We were the ones that fought for that. There was help for students in Canada, emergency student benefit, because we fought for that. Wasn't going to be there. We increased the wage subsidy and we got paid sick leave. Like I want people to know that. And I guess we just have to work harder to make sure those are the stories that get covered. But I'm thankful that we get coverage, though. I'm thankful that there's stories that are being covered. So I don't want to knock the media. I just feel like I think good leadership is you always take it on yourself to figure out how we can be better to make sure those stories are told. So I got to work on better ways to make sure that the work that we're doing gets told and those stories get told. So I'll just keep at it.
But I guess you also have to be aware that if you have a mountain of long-term care policy and you have a kernel of rights-based or grievance-based messaging, they'll cover the kernel and not the mountain.
Well, I mean, the Proud Boys was an important thing. So I think that was, I'm happy that was covered. We led the charge to get Proud Boys banned. And really it was a broader question about the systemic racism in security forces, meaning that real and urgent threats get ignored. And that's really what it was about, because if you look at the States, it wasn't a surprise that the extreme right-wing groups and white supremacist groups that said they're going to storm Capitol Hill, that wasn't a surprise. What was the surprise for everyone watching was how unprepared the security forces were, which leads us to believe that when you've got systemic racism in the analysis of risk, it means real urgent risks are ignored and people then end up paying the price. That there's a devastating outcome. And so I think in Canada, that same thing has been happening for far too long, that those threats that are real and urgent and imminent are ignored because of some form of systemic racism, which ignores white supremacists and extreme right-wing groups. So this was a really important step, and I'm happy that got coverage. Systemic racism, broadly speaking, is an issue that impacts a lot of people. So the coverage on that when the incident happened about being being removed from the House of Commons. That was something that spoke to a lot of people, and a frustration and angst that people feel that have far too often been told that their concern doesn't matter. They've been dismissed and ignored. And so they felt in a moment that someone felt that pain and had reflected it. So I mean, those are important stories to tell. I'll just keep on working to make sure more of the things that we fought for and won are covered as well.
So ending for-profit long-term care and bringing long-term care under the Canada Health Act. Dental care coverage. Pharmacare coverage. Is it possible that I could agree with every one of them, but not all of them? Does that make me a cynic or a liberal, or I don't know? But can we realistically do all that over the near term?
Yeah, for sure we can. I think a couple of reasons are, like, pharmacare was always the plan. Like from the 60s and the 50s, when the commissions were first struck about what universal healthcare should look like, they included doctors in hospitals, which we've done with some. We've got to continue to be vigilant about the encroaching privatization, but we've done those two parts of it. But dental care and pharmacare were always in the books. They were always the goal. And with pharmacare, it's an investment that will actually save us money. And it's not hard to imagine why. If someone is sick and they can't afford their medication, they don't take it, they get more sick. And what happens is they end up when you've got the worst case of an illness, it's going to cost a lot more. So all sorts of research has shown that this would save us money. We're the only country in the world that doesn't have it. And I've been speaking with premiers who may not openly be saying this, but they accept the argument that why don't we just use our buying power together? And I was on the phone with the premier who said, yeah, that's true. But we use our buying power together. Provinces already buy medication for their hospitals. Federal government already buys medication for Indigenous communities and people in the military service. We're all already buying medication. The plan is really just pool that money together, and we'll get way more for it. And we put a little bit more in, and we'll cover all Canadians. It just makes sense. So I think that's just like a no-brainer. It makes sense. We got to do it. On dental care, it just arbitrary that you can go into a hospital, get complex like lung surgery, reconstructive surgery on your knee, but if your teeth hurts, there's no help. Like, it just doesn't add up. We can get that done. And long-term care, really, that's the cost of inaction. If we don't do anything, seniors will continue to get sick and die in long-term care if we don't change the system. And here's some momentum behind it. So these are things that are a must. And to pay for it, we know that there's like 44 of the wealthiest Canadians that have increased their wealth by $66 billion in the pandemic. We know that Amazon, Netflix, Google have made massive profits in the pandemic, but they don't pay any taxes here. So there's ways to pay for this. I believe it's absolutely achievable.
Okay, I'm gonna call bullshit. But first of all, I want to ask you, what has the government done to Dr. Hoskins? I'm worried about him. Have they just locked him up somewhere, or is he buried in the ground, or what have they done to Dr. Hoskins? He's a friend of mine.
Yeah, I don't know, because you know what's mind-boggling? They hire Dr. Hoskins. He goes out and does a commission on pharmacare and comes out with, frankly, our plan. It did great work, and the results are what we all believed as New Democrats. It should be universal, publicly administered, cover everybody. And to this date, the Liberal government has not yet even said we accept the findings of this commission, that the evidence has now shown very clearly what is the best plan. They have not yet said we agree. And so no wonder, you hire an expert in the area, comes up with the result, and then never accept it and force him into hiding. And I don't know about that. I'm sure he's doing great work, but yeah, like they haven't even supported their own commission's finding. It's outlandish.
So I'm going to call bullshit on you.
Yeah, what were you calling BS on? Yeah. What is it?
I'm calling bullshit on your funding. Because I believe in a wealth tax. Okay. I believe in a wealth tax, sure. And I believe 100% in what you propose to do on long-term care.
Okay.
But the long-term care stuff is hugely expensive. You have to essentially expropriate all the property from the existing private owners, and then you have to raise the standard of all those homes to the level of what the Canada Health Act would demand. That should happen, but that is fucking expensive to do. And I'm in favor of a wealth tax, but I don't think there's that much money, that kind of money, that can be gotten, at least until we have international agreements to stop money movement, capital movement. I don't think there's that much money you can get out of the Canadian rich people. I think we should still have a wealth tax, but I think we'll find that there isn't as much wealth in Canada as we might wish there was. And second of all, we'll find that people move their money and we don't get at it. So I don't think there's that much money there. That doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. So it really takes me to a question that you're trying to avoid, which is how much can we spend in this new world? What are the new rules of government spending as far as you're concerned?
Well, I'll push back on a couple of things. One is we got the Parliamentary Budget Office to look at our wealth tax, and we chose 1% on fortunes of over $20 million on purpose because we had economists look at if it was higher, it would be cheaper to then just hide your money. But at 1%, the economists that we've consulted and the experts we've consulted found that it would cost more for folks to move their money than to pay the 1%. So that's one reason why we think it's achievable. The Parliamentary Budget Office indicates that it would raise a whole lot of money, something like $70 billion over 10 years. And it would increase over years as we got better at making sure they don't avoid paying their tax. We know that offshore tax havens, the Canadian government took Loblaws to court because they believe that Loblaws owed $300 million in taxes. And the court established everything. They agreed, yes, they made this money in Canada. Yes, they took all this money and moved it directly to another bank outside of Canada. Yes, all that money is essentially money that they made in Canada, but it's completely legal to do so. So the Canadian government took them to court, hoping to get this recovery, but lost the case because laws allow them to do that. We can change those laws. We can say if you make money in this country, you must make profit in this country, and there's a lot of revenue we can gain from that. We're one of the 8th largest economies in the world. We absolutely have lots of revenue that we're not tapping in. And we can do it and be competitive. For the web giants, who are some of the most wealthiest and successful companies in the world, we can tax them. And France has come up with an idea, let's just directly tax revenue. And they're proposing taxing revenue by 3%, which in some cases might actually recover more money than a corporate tax rate would. And we can do that. And we can recover lots of revenue. We have to talk about revenue to fund the important programs we need to fund. And at the end of the day, when you make a choice, like a budget and the money you spend is a choice, you can choose it on tax giveaways and loopholes. That's a cost as well. You could choose to not go after the revenue that we are entitled to. That's a choice. Or you can choose to invest in people and make sure that the wealthiest pay their fair share. It's a choice. And I don't think that governments have been making good choices and can make better choices. And I'm proposing a way to do that.
Right. When you look at the debt that the government is accumulating through this period of time, are you worried about interest rates going up?
Yeah, I'm worried about the debt.
The whole shooting match is predicated upon rock bottom interest rates.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm worried about interest rates and I'm worried about the debt. And that's why we're talking about looking at revenue. Only ones with a real aggressive revenue plan and a revenue plan that is targeted to those who are able to contribute a bit more. No one else is willing to put that forward. No one else has the gumption or the conviction to do that. We're saying, yeah, there's ways to increase our revenue. And we can't continue to invest in people without increasing our revenue. So we're looking at the ways to do that.
Okay, interesting. Low-income people really bore the brunt of COVID in terms of job loss and lost wages and lost hours if they were part-time or gig workers. I mean, most people I talk to have been, frankly, untouched in income terms by COVID or in financial security terms by COVID. But out there in the working world, it's been a different story. How do you see those jobs coming back, and what do we have to do to get them back?
I think it's a really important question. And just to kind of spell that out, there's a recent jobs number report that came out, 200,000 jobs lost, mostly in Quebec and Ontario. And when you dig deeper, those numbers are young people, racialized people, and women. And really, just to flesh out what you said, you're bang on. This pandemic has disproportionately impacted women, young people, and racialized people, without a doubt. So the recovery has to reflect that. Like if we go back into a recovery and just invest in infrastructure, which I absolutely believe we need to build better infrastructure, help us connect our country better, great ways to create jobs. But those aren't going to be the jobs that actually address the folks that lost their jobs. So I think we have to look at a recovery that responds to who lost jobs. And a part of that is really emphasis on the care economy and the service. So the care economy is making sure when we invest in healthcare, in long-term care, personal support work, the workers there are often women and often racialized. If we lift up those wages, if we create better opportunities for work, it's also going to help our seniors out, but it's directly going to stimulate and create jobs for people that lost their jobs. We have to acknowledge that young people were hard hit. If you have a career, you're well established, you've got a partner in life, the pandemic, maybe didn't really impact you that much. But if you're someone young, starting off your career, starting off your life, looking for a partner, looking to start your career, you were the hardest hit because it's those jobs that weren't available, those jobs that weren't accessible. And so we have to have a clear strategy around youth employment, youth engagement that gets young people back to work. And then acknowledging that racialized people were some of the folks that bore the brunt of this and responding to that. I really believe when we have universal programs, it disproportionately, in a good way, helps those who need it the most. So if we have pharmacare that's universal, it will help the people that have been most marginalized to get access to medication. If we've got dental care, it'll help those who've been most left behind, who didn't have full-time jobs to begin with benefits, so they never had dental care coverage. And that's why I think a lot of the programs we're talking about will help all Canadians, but particularly those who've been hardest hit by the pandemic.
Is the gig economy a reality that we have to accept? Because, those aren't jobs. That's not a job. Like when, Christ, I'm old enough to remember when you expected to get a job and a job that would have security to it and benefits to it. That's why we used to measure the employment rate and say, if unemployment's low, then the economy must be good because everybody's got a job. But now the unemployment rate can be low and people don't have jobs. They've just got shit work.
So true. So true.
Are we stuck with that?
No, I don't think so. I don't want to accept that. I remember the question was put to the previous finance minister, and he said, "Yeah, this is a reality we have to get used to." I'm like, I don't accept that. I don't think we have to get used to bad work. I don't think we should. And in fact, let me put it more positively: we should not accept it. And there are ways for us to make things easier. One of the most important tools is making it as easy as possible to join a union. Is a great way to give people and workers the ability to earn a good living. I think that's key. And the more we can do that, the better. I think that we can increase standards. We can show federal leadership by increasing the federal minimum wage. There's lots of ways that we can show some leadership and we can make it easier for people to get good jobs. And I think we have to. We cannot accept low wage, precarious work as an eventuality or as a inevitable. We need to make it that it's not the case, and there's ways to do that.
What do you think? You mentioned this, and this has been a preoccupation of mine for a few years now. What are the prospects, you think, for treating the people who work in the care professions with more respect? Whether that's through compensation or working conditions, or just how we understand the value of those jobs to be in our society?
That is fundamental. You mentioned long-term care. In our long-term care plan, what is one of the biggest planks is the conditions of work are directly related to the outcomes in health for seniors and residents of long-term care. They're completely aligned. If you get paid a good wage where you don't need to work at multiple centers and you're paid enough that you can continue to work for a long time and stay with the job, it directly improves quality of care. So there is no question about it. We've got to look at the care economy and jobs in the care sector, whatever that is, as dignified and respectable jobs. And the way we do that is make sure that people get paid good wages and they've got permanent jobs. We make those investments, and it's directly going to improve the care that people receive. So there is a dual benefit: dignity for the worker and improved conditions of health for the resident. So we have to do it.
Mr. Leader, our time has flown by. We've actually been on the phone now for an hour.
Wow.
And it's amazing. And I don't want to take up any more of your time. I'm so grateful for the generosity you've been with us, but I can't let you leave as an aging man who's desperate to cling to some pop culture relevancy. What's the key to a good TikTok video?
Great question. Great question. You know what? And it's fair that you asked me, because this is the one platform where I'm pretty much exclusively the only creator on my team. I do all my TikToks. Okay, 3 things. Find a trend and make it your own. So a trend out there to make your own. Don't overdo it, because you want to always remain authentic. I guess that's more than 3 things, but those are the things I would say. Find a trend, make it something that relates to what you're doing and something that you're into. So find the trend, convert it to something that's relevant to your brand. Don't overdo it, and try to keep it authentic. So if you're like not the best, I don't know, whatever it is, if it's a dance move, you can kind of like be a bit self-deprecating about it. Like you don't have to be the best at it. Or if it's a trend that talks about something that's like very current, but you don't know about that current thing, make it about something that you know about. So yeah, there's ways to do it.
Yeah. It has been great to talk to you. I have to say, your positive energy is going to carry me through the whole day. Like you're a positive energy life force. I can feel it.
Oh, thank you. I'm known for that. I'm glad I came across. I really,
yeah.
I'm just so lucky that I get to live the life I get to live, and I get to fight for people. Folks were talking about the lottery one day. I'm like, I already won the lottery. I get to do what I love, and it's a job somehow. And we try to make life better for people, and it's exciting. So I love it.
Yeah. You know, you probably could have been the transport minister or something in a liberal government, eh?
Yes, I was offered that a couple of times, I remember.
All right. Thank you for your time. It was fantastic.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care. Well, the other night in Prince George, it was 25 degrees below zero. In Jasper, it was, get this, minus 34. Yes, we're Canadians, and we like to make a production of being unfazed by that kind of cold, especially when we're talking to Americans. But the truth is, most of us hide from it. Cold like that makes everything stiff and difficult. It slows things down and even breaks them, and it hurts. And if you don't have the right equipment or clothes, it's really dangerous. The railroaders at our sponsor, CN, have a term for killer cold like that in Jasper last week: Tier 2 conditions. Tier 2 conditions start at 31 below zero. Tier 3 starts at minus 36. Tier 4 clicks in at 40 below, which, incidentally, is where Celsius and Fahrenheit meet. Anyway, as of Saturday, a big chunk of CN's operations in central and western Canada and in the American Midwest had been down in Tier 2 conditions for 10 straight days. But the trains have to keep rolling. The economy stops if the trains stop. So CN has what it calls a winter plan. The railway has spent billions on locomotives specially prepped for winter, and air distribution cars that ensure smooth flow through long brake lines. It has track inspection cars that automatically monitor the integrity of steel rails as the train rolls over them. CN even does avalanche monitoring. Ultimately, though, the winter plan depends on thousands of CN employees who are willing to go out into the ferociously cold night and do the work while we sleep or watch TV or work from home. Oh, by the way, it looks like the weather out west is now rising into Tier 1, a mere minus 25, and then maybe even warmer next week. So that's good. Anyway, yes, it's their job, but it's an understatement to say a country like Canada owes some big gratitude to people who go into our winter and get the job done, even in Tier 2, 3, or 4. So thank you. Hey, Jenni, Scott, we're back for another week of the political panel. How are you?
Great. How are you?
I'm fine. This week I'm fine. Feel good. Feeling good. You are dressed unusually professionally. What's up for you today?
I dressed up like this for the pod.
Well, isn't that sweet? But we're in our Scott and I are in our usual fucking shit, and you look like you're going off to, meet somebody.
No, I'm not. Thank you.
You absolutely. You look like you're meeting Parson French. I slept in this shirt and then shoveled snow in it. So you should be glad that there's no odor capacity available on this podcasting platform, because it would not be enriching. Stink like failed man. That's what I stink.
Scott, how much snow do you have? There's an unbelievable amount of snow up here at the lake.
Well, we wouldn't have anything close to what you have. I know north of the city, I'm in Toronto, north of the city, they had something like 2 feet over the course of the last day and a half. I would say we got about a foot last night. I'm not kidding, like 2 feet, right? It's like, woo, great for skiing or, getting trapped up to your waist and starving to death, right? But I got up early and shoveled the snow out and shoveled the neighbor's walk and all that stuff. I got 2 women who live on their own next door to us, so I try to shovel their driveway because they call the city on everybody else in the neighborhood, and so that's my insulation against that. Like, they're having a party.
You put that in your CV, your bio.
I do.
Yeah, I shovel snow for the ladies next door.
I shovel snow for the ladies next door. I just want people. I know people think I'm a complete cock, and I want people to know that I am. But I try to do the occasional decent thing.
So it would be an asshole thing for me to say that I spent yesterday out sitting by the pool.
Oh no! People would love that. It makes us super.
Yeah, no, exactly.
That's great.
Jenny Byrne, woman of the people.
That's right. Up all night shoveling daiquiris.
Hey, listen, I'm in North Palm Beach. I'm not in Palm Beach. There is a difference.
Okay, now you're starting to piss me off. No one around here even knows how to make a Tom Collins right.
Oh, God. So, none of us, I presume, have ever been in an election that was postponed.
No.
But that's what's happened in Newfoundland. They were literally about to vote, and then they got a surge of the new variant cases. Mostly young people. Everywhere you go, the kids want to rock. And they had to cancel the election. They did it in stages. The election officer first said that half of the province would proceed and half would wait and do mail-in, and then they canceled it for the whole province, and the thing is now on May the 5th. Is this going to change the outcome of that election? March the 5th. Is that going to change the outcome of this election?
I'm not sure it's going to change the outcome of this election, but I think it could. I think it could be subject to a lot of legal challenges, because I'm not sure they actually had the legal authority to be able to continue to. I think it was at first, order your mail-in ballots by Monday. Yesterday, order your mail-in ballots by Friday, and now they put off in-person voting, and they which of course will drive down voter turnout. If you look, in Labrador, we had a by-election in Labrador in 2013, I guess it was, and I happily lived in Happy Valley Goose Bay and spent a lot of time at the Jungle Gyms because of their great big fleets of beer, as well as their big mugs of beer, as well as their free Wi-Fi. And there were a lot of areas like Black Tickle and Nain that essentially have mail-in ballot only in Labrador, which suppresses the vote. And so I think that I think that it will not change. I think it looks like the Liberals are going to win, but I think that probably the government of Newfoundland and Labrador will probably be subject to some form of court challenge.
It's interesting you say, Jenny, because when the electoral officer first announced that he was going to be having trouble holding the election because the staff and volunteers were declining to participate because of the COVID outbreak, it was unclear, and this is an interesting question federally and in all the other provinces, it was unclear who had the authority to do anything. Initially, the electoral officer said he couldn't put it on, but he didn't have the authority to change it. And the lieutenant governor said that they didn't have the authority to change it. Obviously, the premier doesn't have the authority to change it. So the electoral officer just sort of assumed the authority to do what to do the cancellation, but they didn't have a clear sort of decision-making tree set up for this contingency.
It makes it super interesting, I guess, from an electoral law perspective, because it doesn't seem unreasonable that in the absence of clarity, the electoral officer would assume, well, if nobody else here can or will, I must. But I assume that's widely open to challenge. They're obviously responding to an extraordinary circumstance, so we'll have to see. But I think what was interesting about it. So first of all, it'll be interesting to see if there is any consequence paid. It'll be interesting to see exactly who it advantages, disadvantages in terms of voter turnout, because Jenny's right, it will for sure be low. But it'll also be interesting to see if there, with the addition of 2-3 weeks, whether there's a narrative that emerges saying, you know what, the government should never have called this in the first place, right? This is a foreseeable problem. I'm not sure that's an entirely truthful statement, but I think it's a very reasonable argument to put forward, and you're hearing it and you're going to hear it. I'm not sure it's going to track, but I think it's going to happen. But I thought the most bizarre thing about it all was the idea, like the first, like you said, it happened in stages. The idea of, well, half of the people can vote and half the, like that to me, that seemed like if you're calling an audible and you're in uncharted territories and you're saying, look, I don't think I've got the authority to do this. I don't know who does have the authority to do this. Therefore, I'm going to assume the authority to do this. I think at minimum, you have to be guided by a principle of general application. Like you can't say, well, then, I'm going to try to do it this way and that way, because even if your motivations are as decent as possible, it's subject to an allegation of uneven treatment and unfair treatment. So at least it's a better outcome than what was rolling at first, because that did seem like a complete head scratcher.
One of the interesting things about it is that the government of Newfoundland, which we talked last week, the province is in real trouble financially, and the province commissioned a woman named Moya Green, who was a longtime federal public servant prominent in the 90s. She ran Canada Post, then she went off to run the Royal Mail in Britain, but she's a Newfoundlander. And they commissioned her to do a report on the future of the Newfoundland economy. And that report is supposed to come out in March. So any report on the future of the Newfoundland economy is going to have some tough medicine in it. Going to have some tough recommendations in it. When the election was supposed to be in the middle of February, the government was getting away with not releasing the Green report before the election. But as the actual election day now moves quite close to when the report was supposed to be released, is it a factor in, do they need to release it, or is it a factor in the campaign that they don't release it?
Yeah, I'm not sure. So March 5th is election day as of now. If they move it, chances are the report, was there a date in March that we heard the report was going to come out, or just sometime in March?
Sometime in March, eh?
My guess is March 5th is pretty early in March. My guess is probably they'll release it after.
It may not be safe to release a report before March 5th. It may, due to COVID, it may not be in the interest of public health to release the report. This is a obviously not landing joke. Hello, is this mic on? Excuse me. I feel like I'm on a USO tour with Bob Hope. All right, fine. We'll cue the band. Look, I don't know enough. I'm not close enough to it. It feels to me like that issue's been sort of fully litigated. So if you were in a world, so those calls may come, but if you were in a world where you were bound to not vote for the government because of that, you probably have already locked that view in. And I'm not sure that the government's going to be all that vulnerable to additional pressure. I think they've taken that punch, and I don't know that they'll pay a greater price for taking it again.
I agree.
Jenny, what would the 2004 campaign have been like if we'd called it before the Auditor General released her report on sponsorship?
Do you think it would have been much different?
I do.
Yeah.
Well, there's a chance. Yeah, I do. I don't know in what way it would have been different. There's a very strong chance it would have gone much better for us. But there's also the chance that we would have, been answering a lot of questions about what we were hiding in it by getting the election out before it was released, and that could have hurt us. And then there's the issue of poison chalice. If you're seemingly win an election on a complete falsehood, often doesn't go well for you after. Ask Gordon Campbell out in BC about how winning on a false statement about the GST went for him. So I don't know. I mean, I remain to have mixed feelings about it.
But in 2004, there was still people. There was a knowledge. There was an understanding that obviously something happened with the sponsorship scandal, regardless of what the Auditor General report was going to be. The problem that you guys had is you were suffering. You came in at the end of 10 years in government, so. I don't think obviously sponsorship helped you, but I think from the time that you guys between Paul Martin becoming leader and the election, the PC party and the Canadian Alliance merged, and you guys had been in power for 10 years. So it was essentially going to be a change. Like, I think 04 and 06 were more change elections than what they were in terms of actual anything to do with the sponsorship scandal, because you guys won. It was a knowledge that the sponsorship scandal happened in 2004, and you guys still won.
Yeah, I mean, this was a live debate in our circles at the time. There were definitely people who were of the view that we should get out before the AG's report came out. And you know why we didn't? Fundamentally, because of British Columbia. Because the electoral boundaries were being redrawn and BC was getting more seats, and we wanted to be as representative of BC as anybody, so we didn't want to be the people that pulled the plug on them when they didn't, just days before they were given their additional seat count in the House of Commons.
That was really the reason?
That's
Paul
right.
felt that he campaigned really strongly on it and made real commitments in public and also in private to people in BC, and did not want to contradict them. And of course, you when you're sitting on projections that say you're going to win 220 seats, you think you're going to be able to win those 220 seats later also, right? It's hindsight, like, it's, the classic story of hindsight's 2020, but I think that people debate, should you guys have called the Gomery Commission and all that sort of stuff. I don't think that's the real debate. I think the real debate is whether we should have called the election in February of 2004. I sure wish we had, and I think we would have won a majority. It does presuppose.
Well, we were in the middle of a leadership race, so that of course you probably would have been better off.
For sure, we would have. I think, but it does presuppose that the Prime Minister would have been able and willing to withstand the demands and the allegation that he was hiding it, and it would have been in contradiction to the change narrative that he had presented for 2 years, which was, we're going to be different. I didn't have anything to do with this, and we'll work as hard as possible to reveal every detail. And so he would have had to eat some of that, and he wouldn't have liked it, and it would have been an obvious contradiction, and it would have been, you have to assume, in order to get to the majority government, that he was willing to take that punch over and over for a week and not get frustrated and say, fuck it, we're going to release the thing. I'm not going to put up with this anymore. Because then it would have gone really sideways.
But I think it would have been hard to, if I was sitting around the table with you guys back in 2004, I'd say it'd be very hard for us to say that we're different than the past government, because I was the finance minister for 8 years of that government. So, like, saying we're different, this is change, I think is an argument that didn't work for you guys.
I think it did work. The problem was that he was changed for the 2 years prior, when he was going to be the next leader. And by the time he became the leader, that message had worn out. And it just didn't have much gas in it.
It got us through 2004.
Pardon me?
It got us through 2004. But.
That's right. But we took every bit of water from Paul's well. And then by 2005, 2006, it really wasn't a left lot. In terms of goodwill with the public, I mean, right? Like, they were just kind of like, by then they're like, fuck, you just ran ahead of the party.
He ran ahead of the party significantly right to the end.
Well, this is a good segue into talking about Ian Rankin and his election as the premier-elect. I don't think he's
Jenny.
actually been.
Thank you.
They're beautifully managed. Do either of you guys know him? I don't know him.
I personally don't know him. I've done some reading on him. I've talked to some friends out east. The reason I was saying it's why the change kind of narrative is one thing that kind of segues from the conversation we were having. Is he seems to be completely the opposite of McNeil. McNeil arguably was actually one of the more conservative premiers that the province has had since World War II, regardless of being a liberal. That was he was very conservative. He even looked like a conservative. In terms of how he presented himself, large family and what have you. And so I think this is going to end up being so Tim Houston is the leader of the Nova Scotia PC party. And so I think this is the challenge that Houston's going to have, is because Rankin is more in the ilk of Trudeau. He ran by far the most pro green energy, environment, solar panels, wind farm type candidate than anyone else. So what the province is getting now is actually real change, and they're getting change from within the same party.
Yeah, it's super interesting because I think you're 100% right, Jenny. I don't think there's any doubt that Rankin, if he's going to be successful, is going to have a different coalition than McNeil had. McNeil had a lot of Annapolis Valley, as you said, moderate, small C conservatives who were part of his coalition. He was a budget balancer. He was tough with the unions. So, yeah, I think you're right. He made it very difficult for the PC party to gain traction. On the other hand, Cape Breton is a really difficult place politically for the Liberals, and Rankin is from Cape Breton. He lives in Halifax now, but he's from Cape Breton. So that may...
Yeah, but that changed. Like it goes between parties. Like the Cape Breton became kind of more of a conservative stronghold when Rodney MacDonald became leader of the PC party, and then premier. Prior to that, it was more. It was Cape Breton was more liberal minded, and then it became conservative. So it kind of switches. But yes, it's going to be very helpful. In the last several years, Cape Breton has been kind of a beachhead for the PC party. And so it's going to be, and the PCs don't have candidates anymore. They had two, Eddie Orrell and Alfie MacLeod were two, very well known politicians who ran federally in the last election and for the federal Conservative Party and lost, but they were very well known on the island. And, so I think it will be very hard it'll be much harder for Tim Houston.
So coming from afar, I don't even have the level of literacy that you two do. So coming from afar, the thing that I wonder about, almost an abstract, is take your point, which I accept entirely. He really genuinely represents change. He's a real departure from the previous premier of his own party. It makes it harder for others who are running against him to say they are the change the province needs when this guy's going to give them a giant dose of change. So the only question that strikes me that remains is, does he stand for too much change? Like, is it such abrupt change in a place like Nova Scotia that people will go, whoa, 9,000 people could see fit to make you leader and by extension premier, but to get reelected, what you're selling is too much? Or does he is it this dose of enthusiasm and a little bit more progressive and builds a different coalition and, makes it exciting? Like, it's when Liberals occupy the center and they can represent change, like it gives them, you can push everybody else to the margins, right? But when you get pushed, when you get squeezed, then you can find yourself with no real estate left over. And it'll just be interesting to see if people if portions of that potential coalition start to peel off of him because they find that what he's peddling is too much. I'm not predicting that. I'm not smart enough to predict that. I don't know Nova Scotia well enough. But he seems like a real dose of change. Like he's running against coal. Now, maybe that's just such a unifying thesis these days. It doesn't matter. that you're talking about Cape Breton, and it's been a long time since Devco wrapped up. So maybe that has advantages as well as disadvantages even there. But I don't know. So that's the only question in my mind is does he represent intimidating change?
Founded and headquartered in Canada, Teck has been helping build communities in the economy for over 100 years. They are committed to responsibly providing the metals and minerals needed for the low-carbon future and for building a better quality of life for people around the world. Sustainability is at the core of everything Teck does. That includes working closely with local communities and Indigenous peoples to advance reconciliation, create growth and opportunity, and ensure the benefits of mining are shared. Teck is setting ambitious goals to build on their track record of responsible development, including setting the goal to be carbon neutral across their operations by 2050. Learn how they plan to achieve this and other important initiatives at teck.com/sustainability. That's TECK.com/sustainability. Yeah, now, I'm going to do the Jenni job now, and this is a nice segue into, we were going to talk about Aaron O'Toole and the federal Conservatives.
Oh, fun.
And the segue is that, first of all, I was just going to make an observation that when Stephen McNeil became leader of the Liberal Party, the NDP were the government of Nova Scotia.
Yeah.
And they have disappeared into thin air out there.
And David, you worked on that election, so how come?
Yeah.
Like Dexter played with the electricity system, and that blew him to smithereens. Why wasn't the NDP able to sustain itself in the aftermath of that? Like, surely that issue didn't make the NDP brand untouchable, or did it? Is it just that?
No, it can't have been, but it was obviously a very thin organization on the ground and very thin talent-wise. And when Dexter left, and I think there was a period of infighting about the Dexter government inside the party. And when they looked up, McNeil owned Halifax, and they had nothing. But the question, I guess, is, in normal Canadian historical political cycles, these Atlantic Canadian provincial elections, at this point of the federal Liberal government, 6 years into a federal Liberal government, these would be gimmies for the Conservative Party. This is what happens when you're in power federally, is the provinces start to turn over to the other party. And the fact that the Liberals look like they would coast back in Newfoundland. The Liberals are leading for re-election again, despite having been in office for a long time in Nova Scotia. That it appears that there is weight on the Conservative brand, and that takes us to the most recent polling that's been out, and I'm referring specifically to Greg Lyle's work at Innovative, that showed, despite the fact that we know that the Liberals are getting negative ratings for their handling of the pandemic now, despite the fact that we know that people are upset about vaccines and blame the federal government for the delay in vaccinations, the Liberals are 10 points ahead of the Conservatives, and the Conservatives are below 30%. I said on Twitter that I don't recall, for this particular party formed in 2003, that I've ever seen worse data for them on a national basis. What's going on?
That's a great lead up, David. Listen, let me start in terms of talking about polling generally for provincial governments. I think what we have seen is that outside of Alberta, incumbent governments are getting a bye and have been getting a bye on COVID. So I don't think it's fair to say that at this stage of a Liberal government, conservative parties should be doing better. I think all governments are doing better than what they normally would do in a cycle, just because of COVID. It's inexplicable in some cases to me, but it's the case. So I think the problem that Aaron has and the Conservatives have right now is that you see the polls that you have. So Innovative had what I think it was 10 points or 8 points. And if you look at the
28.
Yeah, and if you look at the provincial numbers, it's essentially higher than what the Liberals did in the last general election. Angus Reid tweeted out this weekend, I think it was Saturday, that he said that Justin Trudeau's biggest asset is Aaron O'Toole, because the more people see him, the more they dislike him. And despite the bungling of procurement, what one could say was the biggest bungling of procurement by a government in Canadian history since the Ross Rifles in World War I. It's not showing at the polls for Aaron O'Toole. The more people see him, the more they dislike him. And I would argue that this past week, I think, was internally a very tough week for the party.
Why was Poilievre demoted?
Who knows? If you talk to Aaron or if you hear from his people, he wasn't demoted, but I think it's very hard to say that wasn't the case. I know their initial spin out was that, jobs are going to be the most important thing in an economic recovery, but they also appointed a separate person in charge of COVID-19 economic recovery. And so never have I seen a shuffle of critics, because it doesn't matter. Pierre is a guy who is going to be happy doing generally whatever he's doing, because he'll make it his own. He'll go out and talk jobs and jobs, the economy, and continue to do what he's doing. If you look at Facebook impressions publicly, John Ivison put something out this week. It's Justin Trudeau, it's Pierre, and then it's far down everyone else. Pierre has more impressions on social media, 4 times more impressions than Aaron. He has 2 times more impressions than the party. So he'll continue to do his thing. What I heard in talking to people in the Conservative Party over the last week was they're afraid what this symbolizes. They're afraid that this is either Aaron being somewhat petty and vindictive because someone has a bigger reach than Pierre. And if Pierre wanted to run for leader, he would have run for leader. And I argue probably would have won in the field that we had last year. Or this is a signal that he's decided to run the party in a complete opposite direction than what he actually won the leadership in. And that includes, he was out on Thursday talking to the Vancouver Board of Trade, where net zero was the focus of the conversation. There are those that feel in the West that his next step is going to be to support a carbon tax. And so I think that is the problem that he has. So I'll say, and I'll finish this because I'm sure you guys have opinions on this, but there is when Patrick Brown was ousted as leader of the Conservative Party, there is a reason that all 4 leadership candidates campaigned heavily against a carbon tax. And so it might not be the central platform plank that it was for Conservatives in 2008 and 2011, which it was central, didn't really talk about, I think, at all in 2015 or 19. There is a reason those 4 candidates that ran for leader of the Ontario PC Party campaigned heavily against it. And I would argue the reason Christine Elliott lost is because she fucked up. She flubbed a couple lines in the debate we had in Ottawa, where it was basically like, well, there won't be a carbon tax in my first mandate. And that gave the ability for Doug Ford's campaign to pound on her for literally the next month, and why he probably won the leadership race.
Okay. That's super interesting. That is super interesting. Scott, what do you think's going on with the Conservatives? 28. I mean, Jesus. They were like more than 10 points behind the Liberals in British Columbia.
I think O'Toole has problems, but I don't think O'Toole is the only problem. And Conservatives, including Jenni, probably will hate what I have to say. But I think that the party has an impression problem. I think the impression that people have of the party is really limiting. And what I mean by that is you got a government that's 6 years in. Trudeau himself already had a dedicated following of people that were dead set against him. So there's a cell to work from, right? Like, and it's a sizable minority of voters that you would have to build from 6 years in. And I don't think there's any way you can argue, and even the polls reflect that there's a satisfaction with the management of the vaccine rollout. So you put all those things together and you say, well, what's the barrier? And I think the barrier is that people have, not just from the pandemic, but exacerbated by the pandemic and all the extraordinary decisions that it requires, they've taken an impression from Trudeau, notwithstanding the performance on vaccine rollout. They've taken in procurement. They've taken impression from Trudeau that what he cares about most is getting past this and trying to help people through it. And we can argue about whether or not that's true and all that stuff, but I think that is an impression that people have that they've worked hard to cultivate. Now, the problem, and it's always the issue with this government, is that that's at the highest level. Like, they're very good at that brand. Like, what's the impressionistic brand? We want to stamp on it. I think they've succeeded in showing people that they're well motivated. I think that the fundamental line of the last 11 months, which is we'll do what it takes, is actually the perfect line. Because people go, I have no idea what's happening around me between the public health and the economic crises. And the only thing they really want to hear from government is one of fundamental reassurance. So, but let me finish, Jenny. Let me just finish. Okay? Like, I know you're not going to agree, but so.
No, but I'm going to give you statistical reasons as to why I think you're wrong.
Okay, great. I think that they've succeeded on that basis. I think they've succeeded in persuading at least a plurality, if not a majority of Canadians, that they're motivated in the proper way on this thing. And that has been strong enough to withstand even the evidence of failure on managing some files associated with it. Then I think you look at the Conservatives, and I think people have withdrawn a confused impression. Sometimes you hear Poilievre talking about it, enough of this, we got to stop the spending. Then you hear Aaron O'Toole peddling to the far-right extremists with his social media campaign that was during his leadership. And, we talked about this a few weeks ago, and it got real testy. But I think that the pandemic in particular has really, really dealt a tough hand of cards to Conservatives, because people are looking and going, I'm not getting a clear enough signal that you are in the business of whatever it takes. And I don't know if your number one concern is let's get deficits down. I don't know if your number one concern is public health. I got weird messages around masks and restrictions and all that stuff early in the pandemic in the spring. So I don't know. So I think there's an impressionistic problem that's then exacerbated by O'Toole's less than sterling performance as leader. And O'Toole is presiding over a really difficult caucus. He's got these more extremist elements, and he's got Pierre Poilievre, who's pulling in a different direction. I'm not calling Pierre an extremist. I'm saying that he's another strand that pulls on him, and I think he's straddling it. And I thought, therefore, the shuffle crit.
Who's an extremist in the caucus?
Well, Derek Sloan was a pretty strong extremist.
Yeah, he's gone.
Okay.
He's gone. How Aaron handled it was wrong. Aaron shouldn't have put the decision to caucus. He just should have said, this guy doesn't have a place in the party, and I'm not going to sign his nomination papers.
I think the conservative movements have a challenge right
now. In all fairness and honesty, in all honesty and fairness, is O'Toole, and I agree he's not making a great first impression, and it's not helping, but is O'Toole defining the Conservative Party as much as Ford and Kenny are right now for Canadians? I would have thought that Canadians were drawing more of a clue about.
So I want to go to a couple things that Scott said. I actually don't know who in the Conservative movement, outside of some fringe people, and there's fringe people everywhere, that talked about not wearing masks and what have you this time last year. That was actually the government of Canada. That was Theresa Tam. That was the Liberal government that was actually talking that way. In terms of fighting back, in terms of the kumbaya approach, let's look at some examples where opposition politicians have actually done well in terms of not basically saying we're all in this together. Joe Biden. The Democrats did not let up once on Trump in terms of COVID throughout the entire election campaign. It was not this kumbaya, we're all in this together. Rachel Notley, she is now the most, she is doing very well in opposition, and she does not do any of the kind of, the language that Del Duca, for example, does in Ontario.
I didn't say that, though. I didn't say that we're all in this together. I said whatever it takes. But you're saying, which is a different thought. No, but you were saying that's why Justin Trudeau's doing well. So I didn't. I said it's the whatever it takes. I think that's a distinct thing, Jenny. I really do. I think that's different than we're all in this together.
Okay, but it's essentially the same thing, because it's like it's whatever it takes, as in there's not fighting. So let me make my point. So in June of 2020, the Liberals were sitting anywhere between 8 and 12 points up in the polls. In September, when Aaron assumed the leadership race, they were 3 points up in the polls. What happened in the summer? What was the only political discussion we were talking about in the summer? And the absolute corruption and and despicable behavior by the Liberal government with the Kielburgers and their whole fake charity that basically made them a ton of money. So the only thing that happened in 3 months was the Conservatives, mostly led by Pierre, taking on the Liberal government day in and day out. And that is why they went up, and that is why there was a closing a gap in the polls. So I guess what I'm saying is, I think what Conservatives are looking for is we can I think that Aaron's made it clear. Everyone wants to get the vaccines. Everybody wants to be vaccinated because they want to go back to the way of life that it was prior to March 16th of last year. But it's absolutely imperative that Aaron O'Toole holds this government to account. And it seems like day in and day out, Aaron is not. He's releasing very warm and fuzzy videos with his dog and his ad, which I think came out after we did our podcast of, Google, Aaron, and Aaron Brockovich comes in. Well, outside of our age group, Aaron Brockovich, who knows who they are, like what movie that is. My dad wouldn't know it, and my 25-year-old cousin wouldn't know it. And so right. I think that if the Conservatives think they are going to win this election by Aaron O'Toole becoming more fighting the likability factor with Trudeau, I think they're in for a very rude awakening.
So maybe we have to say something nice about the government. Maybe we have to say something nice about the government, because not only, if you look at the innovative poll, if you look at the innovative poll, they've got a 10-point lead nationally. They've got a big lead in Atlantic Canada. They've got a 15-point lead in Ontario. They've got a very significant lead in British Columbia. Leger is out today. Leger is out today in Quebec only. That shows the Liberals up 10 points on the block. 10-point lead on the block in Quebec. How are they going to... is it impossible for the Liberals to lose an election now? I had been under the impression that a bad vaccine rollout could cost them the government. But maybe in this constellation, nothing can cost them the government. Maybe they're just the bloody choice of people.
Look, I obviously, it's always possible to lose. And there's lots of gravel road to drive down between now and widespread vaccination and, 7-8% GDP jump in growth because the economy's below and wide open and all that stuff. But I come back to it. I think that people have osmotically withdrawn an impression. And I think that impression has been to the detriment of the Conservatives. I don't know how much of it is Kenney and Ford, and it gets worn more, ironically, by O'Toole than it does by Kenney and Ford. I don't know how much of it is the debates in the conservative movement in the United States bubbling across the border and giving people discomfort. I don't know how much of it is lack of clarity in terms of whether they're deficit first or do what it takes first. I don't know exactly what it is. But I'm telling you, from my perspective, I think it would be a real mistake for the Conservatives to not say, we're failing to generate the necessary impression with people. And people, and I don't think just finding a scandal to pound the government on is going to turn that thing around. I think that it's, obviously those things help. But at the end of the day, there's something weird going on where you can have a dissonance between what we're seeing from the government on vaccine rollout and the impression that people are withdrawing, and as reflected in those numbers, and how they regard the Conservatives. And I don't think it's all about the government. I think that there's a real impression problem for the Conservatives.
But I'm not sure why you're lumping Ford in when you talk about Kenney and Aaron O'Toole's polling numbers, because Ford's numbers in Ontario are still very high.
That's why I say it's weird that I think that maybe O'Toole is wearing the anxiety that people in Ontario feel more than Ford himself. And maybe that's because Ford has succeeded in the same way Trudeau has in defining himself as more of a, we'll do what it takes. And even as people like me get frustrated with what's happening in schools and so forth, he seems to be able to pound through that because people have concluded that their impression of Ford is that he's properly motivated in the face of this crisis, in the way that they've concluded that Trudeau is properly motivated in the face of this crisis, and therefore file failings don't hurt them as much.
So it's less about partisanship, though, than we're talking about incumbency.
No, I don't think it's about incumbency. I think it's about individual leadership.
Well, there's only one government, and Jason's the only one that's taken a hit in the polls. Every incumbent government, regardless of what their political stripe has across the country, has maintained high polling numbers. Conservative, Legault, Jason is an outlier. Everywhere else, regardless of political stripe, incumbents are faring the pandemic. I don't think they should be, but they are.
I think the Conservatives have a brand problem.
So Jenny, I
really do.
Jenny, if the I lost my train of thought. I was going to say, I've recalled my train of thought, which is Canadians think the government's doing a lousy job on vaccine procurement, but they clearly don't assume that the Conservatives would do a better job of it, or the Conservatives would be in different shape. And I just use that as an illustration to say, does the Conservative Party need to plant in Canadians' heads something that they would be better at than the current government is doing?
Well, they should have been talking about vaccines. We first had this, the first time we had a conversation about vaccines, I think, was the Tuesday after Labor Day. Remember, it was just my picture on the screen because I had gotten stung by the bee, and we've been talking about them on and off for the last several months, but we've seriously been talking about them since the end of November and December. Who hasn't been talking about them, at least in a serious way, are the Conservatives. And so if I had been them back in November, December, that's all I would have been talking about. All I would have been talking about if I was Aaron O'Toole is in terms of would be asking the Liberals where the vaccines are, because I think it's evident that we're going to eventually get vaccines. It's at a much slower rate than most other countries. We're in the 40s, but I would have probably been leading the charge. And now, because there's been, and even now, there's been really no share of voice in terms of the opposition in terms of vaccines, the Liberals are able to go out there and talk more about what the timelines are and what have you. If we don't have the millions of vaccines by the end of March, then it's been another terrible issues management strategy, but the Liberals. But my guess is, based on how forceful their language is, by the end of March, we will have the allotted vaccines that they've been telling us they have.
Okay, this is impossible to know. Okay, but I think that the disagreement between Jenny and I think is kind of interesting, because it couldn't highlight a more fundamental disagreement of strategy. I can't deny that if I was working for O'Toole, that I would be saying we need to be laser focused on vaccine rollout and all that. But I ultimately think that if we could go back in time and they did that, I'm not sure it would fundamentally alter where these numbers are at that you're highlighting and what the dynamic that you're highlighting, David, is at. And that's because, and only one of us can be, this isn't one of those things where people are all jumbled up. Only one of us could be right between me and Jenny. And I think it wouldn't necessarily reverse things or alter things substantially, because I think there is this impressionistic problem that people have drawn. And I think the Conservatives have to figure out how to bust that. And I think it's a not necessarily on your side problem. And in an odd way, and you're going to hate this, but I think that maybe moving Poilievre might have been helpful in that, because I think one of the things that was contaminating the ability to get to "we are on your side" was the use of Pierre with his big platform, because as you point out, it's high profile, to bleed into messages about deficit reduction and fiscal probity. And I just don't think that that's resonating with people right now. I think people take an impression from it that's negative, that's pejorative, that says, their priorities are cockeyed right now.
Scott, the Liberals the Conservatives are taking your view. They're taking there's a fundamental view between you and I, and the Conservatives are taking your strategy, and it's working very well.
They're not. They are for sure not. If they were, they would have been sounding very differently over the last number of months. I think I don't think it's just about their success in litigating the issue of vaccine rollout or other failings of the government. I think it's more about this ephemeral, intangible impression people have of the Conservative brand right now. And they got to fix that thing. Or what vaccine rollout is telling us, that it doesn't matter how badly Trudeau fucks something up, he's still going to lap them.
All right, so let's take our insights and apply it to another party. I am kind of chuffed. My guest on the podcast today is Jagmeet Singh. So I'm very pleased that he's come on, and I'm gonna because it's today, because of his schedule, we're recording that interview after this panel is recorded, which is not normally the case. And I'm going to ask him a question, but I want to ask it to the two of you first. And the question that I'm going to ask him goes like this. You're operating, Mr. Singh, in some very crowded space. The Green Party has a new leader, and she has some game. This version of the Liberal Party leans more left than most versions of the Liberal Party do, and is always most aspirational around election time. What is the reason to choose the New Democrats? What is the NDP's unique selling proposition in that crowded field on the left? What do you think?
You go first, Jenny, because I don't have an answer, and then I want to disagree with you.
I actually was about to say, I don't know. I'm going to be very curious to see what Singh says. I honestly have no idea what I have no idea what their value proposition is currently in the political landscape that we have right now. They're not. Really?
Well, that's pretty damning. If you can't...
I'm not one of these guys.
Yeah. What space do they occupy, Scott?
Nothing very definitively. And I think they've the success of their Quebec breakthrough 10 years ago, I think created a weird problem for them in that it told them now we have a geographic base. So instead of thinking about how much of we are a Green Party versus how much we are a Union Party versus how much we're just trying to be a regular mainstream party that competes to replace the Liberals, they became a geographic party. They're like, now we have a base, we have to defend the base, so we start with that. So we elect a Quebec-based leader, we move more to the center, all that sort of. So it took them down a bunch of roads, and where it's left, I think, is that it's defrayed their definition. I don't know what the answer to your question is. If I was Singh, I think where I would go, one place I would go is to say, look, you want to look at what's gone wrong in the last 40 years for people that are, workaday regular folks. You got fewer benefits, less protection in this world. The rich are richer, you're not. The fundamental problem is that the power of the union to do for you what you can't do on your own, which is fight back against these larger forces, these larger corporate forces, as the governments led by guys like Paul Martin, supported like knobs like David Herle and Scott Reid, took the middle and moved it to the right, right? The lack of unions, the neoconservative, neoliberal, to be politically scientific precise, that agenda became so overwhelming in terms of hegemony that we all started to say that unions are a dirty word, and they're not. And I would say, you know what? We're going to be the party that's going to fight for unionization. We want to unionize workplaces. We want to stand up for working people. We want to make certain that you make more for the dollar that you make more for that hour that you contribute, that you get a bigger slice of the pie. And one of the ways we have to do that is to rebalance the scales. The scales are all fucked up now. And you have no power, and we're going to take that back, and we're going to be a union party. And some may say, well, union, gosh, it sounds like you're taking a step back. I think a step anywhere is a step forward for these guys right now. So I would try to make, not just be about the unions, but I would try to make unionization as an economic recipe and as a working class recipe, as a demographic appeal. I'd try to make that. I mean, at minimum for the gig economy people, right? Like that's also millennial play. Go, you guys are never going to earn, you're never going to be able to accumulate sweet fuck all in this economy. It's the rules are built to screw you. So we're going to be fighting for unionization, and that's going to generate these kinds of benefits for these kinds of people. And if you're with me, fight with me. That would help bring the unions back on board. It would give an answer to enemy Paul and try to put her back in just a pure green box. It would cause real discomfort for the Liberals in terms of their progressive agenda. It may not work, but that's a suggestion I'd make.
I actually don't disagree.
But Aaron O'Toole's already there. Aaron O'Toole's already taken that territory.
Yeah, exactly.
But so to keep it on the NDP. So this is the. But is this not the problem they've had, especially over the last kind of decade since Leighton really, is that they are two different parties. You've got the urban NDP, and then you've got the old prairie. That's where you're from, David, the Saskatchewan type NDP, and this is the problem that they have, is they're so very different in terms of who they are, who their voter base is, and what their priorities are. And we've seen electorally that obviously they are now a party that appeals more, or they're a party that is made up of mostly the urban side of that party, because they almost have no seats, they have no base left in what would have been the old Tommy Douglas, type NDP.
Not even close to competitive in those areas. Those people that voted for Tommy Douglas vote Conservative now.
And they were in the 90s, the Reform NDP switchers in BC and Saskatchewan.
Yeah.
It's Hey You time.
Woo.
Who wants to go first? Who's got a Hey You?
You go ahead, Scott. You go first.
Okay. My Hey You is to Mark Carney, former Bank of England governor, former governor of the Bank of Canada. We helped the government we were part of, recruited him into public service, David. All around tremendous guy, big, gigantic forehead. He's in Ottawa these days, and he launched himself yesterday on social media. He sent out a tweet with a video saying, "Hey, it's really me. It's Mark Carney. I'm on social media. I'm on Twitter. I got a book." And my Hey You to Mark is this. I love you, buddy. I think you're terrific. I think Canada needs you. I think the world needs you and your giant brain. I'd like to see a lot more economic policy focus. And so I'm glad that you're back in Canada, back in Ottawa, and I hope that you're whispering in every ear that will remain open to you. But dude, you got to get a social media manager. That video was hideous. It was crazy town. You can't be doing that, right? That's like an Insta influencer, garbage people kind of video. It's like, hey, check me out. I'm wearing, look at this bracelet I've got, and follow these people, and I'm going to make $7. It's not, so kill the videos. Stay with the substance. Get a social media manager, because I want to see you succeed. But that was a weird start, my friend.
Jenny.
Well,
Hey You.
my Hey You is for new Foreign Affairs Minister Marc Garneau, who I saw out this weekend. So there's been a lot of talk about. I'm not even going to talk about how I think the government should have a much stronger position regarding China and the two Michaels. But I'm going to specifically in this Hey You address the Olympics. So he did an interview this weekend where he talked about, well, I don't know whether we'll send government representation to the Olympics. So we're not talking about whether Canadian athletes should participate in the Olympics, because there's a debate on both sides, like what the athletes have in terms of their training and on the diplomacy side. But the least that this government can do is say that we are not going to be sending a contingent of government officials to the Olympics, while the two Michaels remain in detention, having been kidnapped by the Chinese government, especially on the backs of this weekend, the disastrous interview that the vice president of government relations for Huawei had with Mercedes Stephenson, Morgan Elliott, where he equated the detention, the legal detention of Meng Wanzhou with the two Michaels. So I think that the Canadian government has to finally take a leadership position on that.
Interesting. My Hey You is to Dan Arnold, the Prime Minister's pollster. Dan, if your internals are showing a 10-point lead in Quebec and a 15-point lead in Ontario and a 10-point lead in British Columbia, please shovel the walkway to the Governor General's place.
Who's there now?
And drag the and I don't know, whoever's there, whoever will answer the door, drag the Prime Minister down there. This constellation of circumstances that leads to this kind of numbers and would lead to that kind of government. Believe me, they don't last forever. And when you see them, take them. So my Hey You is to Dan Arnold, buddy. If you're seeing what the public pollsters are seeing, get the Prime Minister over to see the Governor General. Okay. Thank you all. Thank you all for being on the show today. Thank all of our listeners. Thank the people behind air quotes who put this together. I want to thank Jagmeet Singh for the interview that will happen later today. And anybody that feels so inclined, give us a shout out on social media or fight your way through the iTunes website to give us a review. and a rating. Jenni, Scott, thank you again for your time today. So great to see you. And like I say, you're both keeping me sane through this. Love you both.
Bye, guys.